I was distracted. Sargon showed up in the chat and he says Ukraine has always been and will always be a puppet state of someone.
I haven't seen any evidence of this. And this whole thing about like, oh, Ukraine's going to be a puppet of someone. This sounds like a very bad whataboutism trying to morally, justify Russia's
not doing
actions.
anything, or
to justify not doing anything. I don't even know why we have to defend this. We literally this happened in history again and again. Germany is the perfect example.
Okay, let's
of
hear
this.
it.
Okay, Germany gets split in half during the war. One half of it becomes a puppet of the USSR
Oh, you're right.
and Russia,
You're
and
totally
the other half
right.
becomes the puppet of the US and the West. And we all know what the happened.
Yeah. I was distracted. Sargon showed up in the chat and he says Ukraine has always been and will always be a puppet state of someone, which is something
I don't agree with that.
I have it on my list to talk about. We haven't really talked about it. That's a question that I have because there are a bunch of people banding that around on Twitter, on both the left and the right.
Well, it's interesting because first of all, there's two things about that. First of all, I don't believe that that's true.
I have Kim Iverson here making the same declaration.
And then, but the second thing I was going to say is, would people say a country is a puppet to America, and people say a country is a puppet to Russia? Those imply very different things.
Hugely different things.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like you say like, oh, a country's a puppet to America. It's like, okay, you have a country that, America, when it comes to UN votes or it comes to trading deals or whatever, they're partial to America, right? It's a little bit different than being like, well, there's a puppet of Russia, which means Russia are basically going to steal all their resources and give it to their oligarchs. I mean, when the Ukrainian president, I don't know if you remember this, in 2014, when the Ukrainian president ran away, when Yanukovych ran away and flee the country. Do you remember what happened? The protesters stormed his house. Do you remember this?
I don't know. Tell us.
In 2014, when the pro-Russian Ukrainian president Yanukovych fled the country, protesters stormed his house, and they found out he was living in this giant palatial estate that had an 18-hole golf course. It had a private zoo. It had like a massive underground like shooting range. And he had so much gaudy, he had like $100,000 chandeliers in his house. He had so much gaudy shit that a meme, if you remember, there's like a meme of a golden toilet that got passed around and people thought it was in his house. So it turned out not to be.
Remember what I was saying?
This guy was so corrupt and he was obviously getting paid off so much by Russia. And then to compare that. Rewards. Right. And then to compare that to like, oh, being a puppet state of the US is going to have that kind of effect is crazy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a tough one because
it's not. It feels like
some of these states that are puppets of the United States, we give financial aid to, right?
Right.
And that money never makes it to the populace. It just is used by the oligarch or the autocrat to pay off the 8 people that are keeping them in power.
But there's a difference between like, okay, so America is friendly with Saudi Arabia, right? The difference between America being friendly with a country that already has an oppressive or authoritarian government. And so America, paying off that government is going to just go into their pockets. That's very different than America being friendly with a country that's a democracy, or at least fucking trying to be a democracy.
Right. It's all dependent upon whether or not it's moving in that direction.
Right.
Yeah.
And it seems, I haven't seen any evidence of this. And this whole thing about like, oh, Ukraine's going to be a puppet of someone. This sounds like a very bad whataboutism trying to morally, justify Russia's
not
actions.
Doing anything, or
to justify not doing anything.
Right.
Which seems crazy because it also seems crazy to think that America being friendly with a country, or Europe really being friendly with Ukraine financially, is comparable to a foreign power literally physically invading the country, physically removing or killing the person in charge.
Yeah, we're not going to
supplanting it. That's what Russia wants to do.
Yeah.
And supplanting it with some person that will be their stooge. And to compare those two things is so outside the realms of fair in my mind.
Yeah, there are people that will say, you know, well, our CIA is knocking off presidents. Like our CIA would do it differently, but
When's
we
the last
would.
time our CIA knocked off a president?
Well, I have no idea. I have no idea. Yeah,
Okay. I
I,
just
I'm.
I am very sussy skeptical of the rampant whataboutism,
Let me read this Kim
the
Iverson
U.S.
tweet.
whataboutism. Okay.
So Kim Iverson says, and she's on what is it, The Hill? She's taken over for Kyle Kalinski's new sugar mama. What's her name?
Crystal ball.
Crystal Ball, yeah. So Crystal Ball and Auger have moved on, and Kim Iverson is now on The Hill, Rising, I think it is. So she says, I definitely do not agree with this. If the United States were invaded, I would absolutely fight for it personally. But Ukraine is different. It's run by corrupt oligarchs. It's a coin toss for many live under a corrupt Western or Russian influenced government. Now, for me, I feel like if you're gonna start the path towards democracy, which I've already said earlier, you know,
Right.
it's a long, arduous path from a corrupt autocrat state to a democracy where rank and file people have political power, and with political power comes economic power, and with economic power comes a dynamic economy. You know, a technologically advanced modern Western economy. You don't get there in autocracies. Autocracies are generally rich and poor. You know, abject poverty and
Right.
opulence, which the old leader of Ukraine is a perfect example of, right? So this new leader takes over and they're moving, you know, the needle moves slowly. A lot of people want it to happen overnight. It doesn't. My question is, are we on that path? And if we are on that path, you know, it comes from the book, The Narrow Corridor to Liberty. If we are on that narrow corridor to liberty, we don't want to get knocked out of the narrow corridor. But Kim Iverson here, and I guess Sargon as well, is saying, no, it doesn't. It doesn't matter if who the puppet state is, because
Right.
it's going to be an autocracy either way. I
Well, and my
Go
and
ahead.
my problem with the Kim Iverson tweet and those kinds of sentiments too is that I don't believe, I'll agree, and I'll admit to this too. I don't know the intimate workings of the Ukrainian
We
government and
don't.
how
Yeah.
corrupt it is, but
Yes.
I don't believe that she does either. I don't believe anyone
Yeah.
making this claim that, oh, Ukraine is just as corrupt under trying to be, friendly with Europe but friendly with America than it was under being friendly with Russia.
Right.
I I don't believe anyone actually has some long history of diving deep into that information and has some like, oh no, actually, let me explain to you exactly. I have all this information about why it's just as corrupt or worse.
I mean, it's kind of obvious what would happen with the Taliban after we got out of Afghanistan.
Right.
I
Well,
don't
just
necessarily
and
know
as I
if that's the
said,
Taliban in Ukraine.
and I said, as I said, look at it just on its face. Okay, at least narratively, Zelensky's already won this in terms of the corruption fight because you have, the corrupt pro-Russian president Yanukovych flees because of protesters.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, as a lot of protesters, but he flees the country and runs away to Russia. And Zelensky, if you're going to say he's just as corrupt, and yet he's willing to risk his life and his family life to stay behind
Mm-hmm.
and to
Yeah.
lead his country while Russia is knocking the door that wants to kill him.
So far, that's the only piece of evidence I think we have that illustrates one way or the other. So
That's yeah,
I went back and I reread the Dictator's Handbook, the situation on what we're talking about here, the autocracy versus the democracy. And there is very much, democracies serve the voters back home. They don't serve the interests of the people in the other nations. So I'm not Pollyanna about this. We definitely will install leaders in other nations that will help us get policy that we want in those other nations, sell us resources inexpensively or whatever.
right.
So, but my question here is that doesn't mean that the interests of the puppet government can't align with whatever U.S. interests are, which would be a win-win situation. So obviously, The Russians don't have that situation. The Russians' interests aren't going to align with the Ukrainian interests.
I don't even know why the fuck we have to defend this. We literally this happened in history again and again. Germany is the perfect example
of this.
Okay, Germany gets split in half during the war. One half of it becomes a puppet of the USSR and Russia, and the other half becomes the puppet of the US and the West. And we all know what the fuck happened.
Yeah.
The Russian one became a shithole, and the Western one became awesome.
Yeah, and they also erected an Iron Curtain, not only around East Germany, which didn't get reunited until the fucking 80s. They built a wall around East Berlin, the fucking city.
Yeah, so I don't. Why do we have to go into this fictional whataboutism? We've
of
literally
one
seen
puppet
this
versus
play
the
out.
other. Yeah,
yeah. And that was part of the reason the U.S. nuked Japan. Was to prevent Russia from invading Japan and taking half of the fucking country.
Yeah.
And Japan being after the war, Japan was basically neutered and became, everyone's bitch, or the Western's bitch and US's bitch. And look what happened.
Well, I think if you do the thought experiment.
Now they make anime and we all love them.
Oh, Japan? Of course. Yeah. Well, I think, okay, if you want to play this game on what are the interests of the U.S., just okay, let's say Sargon's right, let's say Kim Iverson's right. It's just this Ukrainian president is just going to do whatever we say, whatever the U.S. says, whatever we want, they're going to sign off on. Then you have to ask yourself, well, what are the U.S. interests? And I feel like our interests are really stability. Which isn't that the Ukrainians' interest?
Right.
Aren't both interests aligned?
The U.S. interest would be, and this is why Hasan's take was so dumb. The U.S.'s interest for the Ukraine, if they were a quote-unquote puppet state, would be stability and to be as strong as possible.
Yes.
To counteract Russia.
Right.
So I don't so saying that it's the same thing is preposterous.
So let's do it the other way. Okay, so the coin toss goes the other way, and they're going to be a corrupt puppet of Russia. What is Russians' interest?
Russia wants to suck all of that oil out.
They want to sell all of their natural resources on the open market and make sure none of that money gets to the population of Ukraine.
Right.
How are those the same thing?
I mean, considering the last 300 years of Russia's rule over Ukraine has been to systematically destroy their culture and to make them as Russian as possible, I don't know. It just seems a little different to me. I'm just saying.
I don't get it. I mean, if you want to make if you want to make an argument that, I mean, what do you think the U.S. interests are that are more nefarious than?
Well, anyway, let's continue. I don't want to get
Putin
held up on this one thing, but
what do you mean? This is interesting. Do you have any in any of your reading? Did you have any idea what the U.S. interest could be beyond stability, so that we can?
No, stability and Ukraine. It was literally stability and Ukraine being as strong as possible to counteract Russia, and I mean, if possible, to be able to compete with them in their oil markets.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Used to be part of Russia's doorstep, and NATO broke the promise. So we've been expanding. So that's the big problem here. There's other.
And people keep saying, he just said it, a million years ago. They keep saying that like the Ukraine was about to join NATO. Where does that come from? I think nothing that indicates that Ukraine was just about to join NATO right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why this happened. Did you see? I mean, I don't know what they're referring to.
I don't either.
Problems. And here, this was a pretty good explainer. It's on fast speed, so really got to listen. Here we go.
Hi, you just listened to a clip from the Sitch and Adams show. If you like what you heard, you can listen to our live show right here on this channel on Sunday, starting at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. And if you want, you can super chat us. We read $20 and up super chats on the show and then do a follow-up stream on the following Tuesday where we read the rest of the unread super chats and interact with fans of the show. Subscribe to this channel right here to listen to the live show or to listen to more of our awesome clips.